Hospital Porter's pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanmo TV and welcome to this. It's another roving film review. Yes, I haven't done one of these for a while, so it's nice to get back into it. I'm actually on my way to see Dune. Now, a lot of people have been talking about Dune, about that it's worth seeing, and I suppose I've got a bit of prejudice against remakes. However, I'm going to give this one a go. The trailer looked very good. It's a very, very good story. I think it's very interesting from a Herpanmo-esque point of view, so I'm going to see what it's like. I haven't read the reviews. As always, I don't read reviews. All I know is what people have told me. So I'm going to go to the Curzon Cinema in the Westgate Centre. It's been out for a couple of weeks. I haven't really seen much of it. I haven't really had a chance to see much. But I haven't had a chance to go to the cinema really during that time, and it actually won't be around much longer, so I thought I'd better get in there and see it, which means I've got to head for the Westgate Centre. I must say, I feel a bit uncomfortable doing this. Like, maybe that's why I haven't done a roving review for a while, subconsciously, and that is because I wonder how much longer I'm going to be able to do this, for obvious reasons. We don't know where the restrictions are going. We know what Australia has done. We know what Austria has just done as well with its V-word passports. And are they going to bring them in here? But anyway, for now, here's John Lewis, the Westgate Centre. John Lewis with his Alien ad. Did you see the Alien ad? I actually talked about it in the last UFO disclosure video. And here we are at Bond Square, being entertained by new musicians. This is actually not the first film made of this book. The book Dune is a part of a series, a series of novels by Frank Herbert. The first one came out in 1965. It was adapted in 1985 by David Lynch, the guy who brought us Twin Peaks. That is a fantastic film. It's superb. I've not seen it for a while. I mean, I feel the urge to watch it again, actually. Maybe I'll do a separate review of that, but brilliant. I read the book after I watched that film. It's a really good book too. It actually inspired George Lucas to do Star Wars, and there's a lot of similarities between Dune and Star Wars, actually. But anyway, there's the Westgate Centre. Let's go in there and watch the movie. They've got the Christmas tree up already. I am up on the roof terrace, as you can see, at the Westgate Centre. I've just been to see the film Dune, and you see the moon behind me now. It's actually, I can't really say too much now because I've got too much to do now. Normally I'd like do my review as I'm on my way out, but I can't do that now. I've got to go meet up with some friends, actually. I'll tell you more about them in a minute, but I'll have to do the main analysis actually another time, so I don't normally do that with these roving reviews, but I have to. So I've got to go meet some friends. I'll tell you about them afterwards, and then I've got to get something to eat as well, so see you later. Okay, turns out I've got a bit more time than I thought I would. I'm here at Gloucester Green. I've just had something to eat in a cheap little burger bar. Interesting, the reason I've got a little bit more time than I thought, because I thought I was going to have a sit-down meal. This is going to interest you, and this is not a subject for this video. I'll make another video about this particular subject, but I have mentioned it before and I will come back to it again. I went into we've got the big three burger bars here in Oxford. That is McDonald's, KFC, Burger King. All three of them are cashless. I mean, McDonald's been cashless for a while. You have to go in and actually order everything on a little console and you collect it. But Burger King and KFC also no cashless. KFC has the same ordering system. Burger King still has counter service, but it's cashless. You can't buy anything in those particular outlets without it being registered on a computer system with money that you don't hold in your hands. There are fundamental threats to civil liberties and civil rights over this system, and I'll save my rant about that for another episode. I just said, look, I've got no cash, and they said, all right, I can't serve you without cash. I said, well, using cash is a fundamental civil liberty. No, I just walked out. Luckily there is a place. It actually is kebab kid at Gloucester Green, Oxford. You can still get stuff with cash there for you crazy libertarians like me. I've got a bit more time than I thought. Anyway, more time than I thought. So the film Dune. It's by Denis Villeneuve, the guy who brought us The Arrival, which is very good. The Arrival, I think, is probably the best alien invasion movie of all time. Alien invasion movies vary an awful lot, don't they? I mean, in terms of intellectual content and technical quality. The Arrival scores high on both axes. Look at that, LSD Productions, eh? Hey man, I got this tripped out feeling in my head, man. Anyway, yeah. So Denis Villeneuve, when I realised he was directing, I anticipated greatness, and in terms of technical quality, I got greatness. The spaceships in Dune, the ornithopters, these aircraft with which are rather like helicopters, and the other hardware, the buildings of Arrakis and Caladan and other places like that, very well put together, very, very like Arrival. The spaceships have this huge, great big sort of flying tower block like feel to them, you know, and big floating solid sort of rock things. I'm trying to find a place to go where it's quiet, but I can actually see to write the notes I sort of scribbled down. Interesting, in the ads before the film started, they showed the Alien ad. the John Lewis Alien ad I was talking about. You know, special effects, very, very good indeed. Acting again, costumes, stuff like that, top notch. It's got some new young actors, it's got some old classic actors you've seen somewhere else, you know. Lots of people. Sort of very high level cast. The costumes really cool, especially the Bene Gesserit costumes. They sort of like have these kind of weird nuns habits, which was in the previous film. It's done much better, I think, in this film on the technical side. Same with the Fremen. I know I've sung the praises of David Lynch's 1985 adaptation, and I will again. But the Fremen in the Lynch film had a kind of slightly spandex sort of mods and rockers look to them, which is different from their description in the book. In the book, they have a distinctly Bedouin-like feel. They have, and this is how Herbert describes them, because in fact the entire planet of Arrakis, which is a desert planet, is based actually on the deserts of the Middle East in terms of its geography, its appearance, its people, language, religion, etc. It's all based on that. It's all inspired by that. The Fremen in this film are dressed like, they have the still suits on, you know, these special clothing that recycles the water automatically from their bodies, but they have like the flowing robes and headdresses and things of the Bedouin, which is what I think. So it's more authentic to the novel probably than the Lynch film. That being said, however, and I know Slaxer hates it when people say that, but I don't care. That being said, however, it's actually it's not a brilliant film. I didn't think it was very good. Very, very, very much inferior to the Lynch adaptation. Very much inferior generally. Apart from the areas where it is better. Generally speaking, the Lynch adaptation is 100 times better. And first thing, the film doesn't cover the entire book. The Lynch one does. This one actually ends. The film actually ends, and you can see it's truncated. It has a truncated ending. It's cut off very abruptly, as if the screenwriters actually intended originally to produce a longer film which covered the entire story. But they ran out. They probably said, "Look, this is going to be too long. We have to cut it down." And as it is, it's over 2.5 hours long. This film, but it ends basically when Paul escapes from Arrakis, and when the Harkonnens come back and retake the city, and he escapes into the desert with his mum, and they join the Fremen, and that basically is where the film ends. Whereas, of course, if you read the book or if you watched the Lynch that's just, you know, that's when it starts getting exciting. You know, that's like the middle of the entire story. But they did say part 1, so presumably there'll be a part 2 at some time. Whether I'll go and see that, I don't know. It's very much a filmy noir, this one. The actual book and the Lynch film are very, very colourful. They have a lot of detailed descriptions of scenes and things like that. There's descriptions of the desert and things like that, and the various colours in the rooms, and how the water cellar goes around, and how they pour the, you know, that Duke Leto, you know, he ends the practice of like giving the servants only water that's been squeezed onto the floor and things like that. All these little details are left out of this film, and they all add both physical colour and mental colour to the story, and these are absent in this film. This film is pretty much it's a slow-paced, very calm, undynamic filmy noir. I mean, one of the reasons my notes are so scraggly, and I've got like 6 lines per page, is because normally, you know, when I'm writing notes in the cinema, you can't use your phone because they don't let you because the glowing screen and everything, it just puts people off, even if the phone's on silent. So I could all the general colour scheme is very dark. Everything's made of stone, dark stone. Of course, the Harkonnens are dressed in black, as you'd expect them to be, but the Bene Gesserits wear black dresses and things like that. But generally speaking, the Lynch film had a kind of steampunk feel to it, whereas this has a kind of I don't know how to describe it, but they live in all the rooms inside the palace of Caladan and Arrakis. They all have very little furniture. It's all very simple. It's a very simplistic kind of design. The exception is the room where, in the first scene, Paul and his mother are having breakfast together, and she's teaching him like to use this voice, this voice of command that the Bene Gesserits use, and that's actually more. It's more like something from the Star Wars trilogy. What's the time? I'm going to take a little walk around here. I've got a bit of time to kill now before I go and meet my friends. Yes, I have friends in this area. I'm making an effort to build a social life for myself offline. To give you a bit of background, it's a science fiction film set in a distant future, a future in which humanity has sort of moved out into the entire universe beyond the Earth, in the same way that it moved out of Africa originally, and so there are entire cultures that are built up on various planets. It's actually 10,191. We don't know if that's the calendar we use today. It's obviously the distant future, and there are the action takes place on Arrakis, this desert planet, primarily, but there are other planets as well. There's Caladan, which is the planet of House Atreides. There's Gidi Prime, the planet of the Harkonnens, the bad guys. And there's a planet called Kaitane, which doesn't actually appear in this particular film, but is mentioned in the book and the Lynch adaptation. There's several other strange differences between the book-stroke Lynch adaptation and this adaptation, which I do wonder why they've been put in there. It seems like it's change for change's sake, or differences for no real reason, and I do wonder why that is. What I'll do is I will do another little bit of extra reviewing later on, because I'm sure I'll think of more, about this. I don't want to just end it and just leave it. I mean, I'll do the review now, do some review at home, and then I'll do the critics review, the critics assessments and things like that. Generally, I do wonder why they put in these certain particular changes I'll go into. But now, as I said, this was the 1965 novel was very much inspired George Lucas when he created Star Wars. And you can see the similarity, especially if you read the book. You can see the similarity between this story and Star Wars. Although Star Wars, the there are various kinds of creatures. The difference in Star Wars is there are different kinds of aliens, whereas all the sentient beings in Dune are human, or they are the allegories of human. They appear to be human. Whether they originate on Earth or what, whether the calendar 10,191 refers to the Earth or whatever, I don't know. We don't know if is it simply an imperial Earth age, or is it a long time ago galaxy far, far away kind of thing. We don't know. That's never revealed in the story by the author. There's no reference to Earth at all, which you think there would be if all the humans actually came from there. You'd think there would be some reference to Earth as the original planet or something like that. No reference at all. Which leads me to think it is the latter, which would be better, I think. It would be better. The kind of society, what I'm very interested in is the kind of society that's grown up because it seems to be a combination. It's a combination of high technology. As I said, it's high futuristic technology, spaceships, the folding of space, that is hyperspace travel, which is what the spice is for, which they mine on the planet. It has that kind of Star Wars element to it. And again, it's another similarity to Star Wars, but it also has that sword and sorcery feel to it. The entire story, again, like Star Wars. There are, for example, everyone fights with swords. I mean, there are these things called las guns, which are kind of laser guns, or ray guns, whatever you call them, but they're hardly ever used. And you think to yourself, well, why not? Because they're more useful than the sword. But for some reason, everyone fights with swords and shields and that. And, well, they have these electronic shields, which cover the whole body. And it's most futuristic visions, certainly in sort of late 20th century sci-fi, tend to envision a future of, in fact, even dating back to very early science fiction, the cosmic fiction that came mostly out of Russia in the late 19th century, seems to envision a future which is more kind of like modernism, but more extreme. So you'd have a kind of anarcho-communist economy and political system. You'd have things such as polyamory, free love, things like free love, polygamy, stuff like that. It'd be like some big hippie commune or something, because I suppose that's the way the society was heading, and has been heading since the beginning of the modern age. However, Dune's not like that. The society of Dune, politically and socially, it is medieval. It's much more like the feudal era of the Middle Ages. In middle-aged Europe, Middle Ages of Europe or China, for example, you have warlords. They're called houses. There's a house Atreides are the good guys, and House Harkonnen are the bad guys. The leader of the Harkonnens. Interesting, the Harkonnens have personal anti-gravity machines, which for some reason the Atreides people don't have. But the Harkonnens are the leader's called Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, and it's the leader of the Atreides, the good guy. The leader of the good guys is called Duke Leto Atreides, and he's called Your Grace, Sire. They use these aristocratic honorifics, so there's an aristocracy in this particular story. It's a distinctly hierarchical society, an absolute not so much a monarchy, but a feudalocracy. There's an empire. There's something called the Imperium, and the houses are all part of an Imperium ruled by an empire, by an emperor. And the emperor sort of doesn't really come into the story much. He kind of lets the houses do what they want, although he does interfere sometimes, because what causes the situation in the story is that Arrakis, this very, very important planet, because it's essential for interstellar travel, because of the spice that's mined there, this chemical that for some unexplored and undescribed reason is necessary for space travel, belongs to the Harkonnens, and then it's sort of given to the Atreides. And the story begins actually when Paul, the heir apparent to the Duchy of Atreides, or the House of Atreides, goes to Arrakis, and yeah, it's a very traditionalist society as well. Feminists won't like it. I mean, what's interesting about this particular book, I think, is where feminists go wrong generally with misunderstanding the role of women in society, is that feminists have generally regarded the life of a woman in society as simply nothing more than a slave until the emancipation of women in the 20th century. Before that, women were essentially chattels. They were slaves. They literally had nothing. I just go back this way because I don't want to go where it's noisy. They literally were the property, and we often hear that word, the property of their husbands and things like that. Feminists still describe that today, and they describe housewife slavery and things like that. Even though, of course, the relationship economically is totally different. Women are basically given money to spend. With slavery, it's the other way around. The slavery earns capital which is taken from him or her, usually him. But of course that misunderstands the role of women in politics in these traditional societies. Women have always been enormously politically powerful in feudal and aristocratic societies, but their power comes not from direct rule but from influence. You ever heard the phrase, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world? The women's power comes from their ability to influence children and to influence men. We're actually getting a taste of that in today's world, because Carrie, Boris Johnson's wife, has often been described as the most powerful woman in the country. She has no official position. She doesn't own. She's not a multi-millionairess. She's not elected to any official office. Yet she's the wife of the Prime Minister. And people often complain that Boris's new kind of the sort of green, the new green, new Boris type figure comes very much from maybe conversations she's been having with him, and we've seen this throughout history. I mean, in the Roman Empire, women had no political power at all. All the Caesars were men. Yet, women, people like Agrippa, the wife of one of the Caesars, I can't remember who, and Calpurnia, the wife of Julius Caesar, they really held enormous influence. They had enormous ability to change things around them. They were very effectual indeed because of their ability to influence the children, to influence the men. And we see that. We actually see this in Dune, in the original story and in this film, but in all the films. Not only that, but there's an order of female mystics called the Bene Gesserits. And they're the ones who have this amazing costume, like a nun's habit, completely black with a veil, and they have like a hijab and headscarf and a big long flowing dress and things like that. They have psychic abilities, and they're rather like the Jedi, except they're all women. And now Jessica, the mother of Paul, has broken the rules by training her son to be in the ways of the Bene Gesserit, and the Bene Gesserit Grand Mistress, the godmother, the Mother Superior, whatever you want to call her. There's a very interesting conversation where she says, I can't remember exact words. She's played by Charlotte Rampling. You can't see her face because she has this veil over her face, but I recognise her voice. She says, "You trained a mere male into our ways," and that says it all, doesn't it? That's it sounds horrible. It sounds sexist, but it's essential for the Bene Gesserits to remain exclusively female. In the same way it's necessary for so many institutions to remain exclusively male. Fascinating. It's a fascinating element of the story. I'll say more about this later, I think, because so let's see if I'm finding more of my notes. I'll go and meet my friends in a little while. I'll tell you more about them later. I'll tell you about them now and I'll do the rest. Yeah, this is kind of a space opera. It's a film noir, Denis Villeneuve. It has a Middle Eastern feel. The score's by Hans Zimmer. It's partly like the Arrival score. There's a lot of those deep sort of bass notes. There's very sort of like slurring bass notes you get with Arrival, like that, you know. But there's also like there's a very sort of Middle Eastern feel to it as well. So it's let's have a look. There's some weird things, like there's these sandworms. Now, these gigantic creatures, they've been described as 450 meters long, and they bury in the sand of the desert in Arrakis. And one of the things you learn later on is the Fremen have learned how to ride them. It's very interesting, but that just doesn't come into the story because, like I said, the film ends halfway through the entire story. But they are huge creatures that travel very fast. They can burrow very fast through the sand, and they're they have very good hearing and attracted by rhythmic noises, even footsteps. Which is why you have to walk very carefully and with an irregular gait when you are walking across the desert. They swallow up the spice miners. The spice miners they have to be dropped in certain places by these aircraft called carrioles, which are like big balloon-like things. And then they collect spice, and then they're picked up by the carrioles later, or they sometimes have to call in an emergency evacuation when a worm comes along. There doesn't seem to be much you can do to fight the worms, because they're huge and they're very, very nasty. Makes you wonder what they eat when they don't get spice miners and people crossing the desert. I mean, that's the question you had to ask about that huge, great monster in Empire Strikes Back, the one in the asteroid, you know, that swallows the Millennium Falcon. What does it eat normally when it doesn't get Millennium Falcon? Because it grows, if it's going to grow to that enormous size, it must have a food supply of some kind. But that's a mystery, it's never really explored. Yeah. There's also these mentats. Now, mentats are human computers. But they're not robots. They're humans, but they have their brains have been modified to give them the power of computers. It seems not through any kind of cyborg element. It just seems to be they've been bred that way. They have it says in the book that they have cherry-stained lips, and Thufir Hawass, the mentat of the House of Atreides, he has literally cherry. It's all like dark cherry-coloured skin around his lips, and he's played very well by Freddie Jones. In this film, the actor, is it Stellan Skarsgård? I can't remember what his name is, an old guy. Stellan Skarsgård, I think his name is. Oh, very old man now. He was in films years ago, and he's still acting today. They have like a little mark, just a little square mark on the bottom of their lips. And the House Harkonnen has their own mentat as well. I mean, they all get killed apart from Vladimir because of this. What happens is there's a betrayal by Dr. Yui, the court physician, and sorry for the spoiler. And Duke Leto gets killed quite early on in an attempt. Yui tries to use him to kill Harkonnen, Vladimir Harkonnen. And the Baron sort of he tries to blow poison gas in his face. It's an interesting element to that. It's done much better in the Lynch film. And the entire court is wiped out apart from Baron Vladimir. But the House Harkonnen has their own mentats. It's almost as if it feels almost like the Imperium represents a kind of Illuminati. It lies above everything. It controls everything. Yeah. It's quite content to let the various houses fight amongst themselves. I mean, it gave Arrakis to the Atreides, but when the Harkonnens try to take it back, indeed they do succeed for a while. The Emperor doesn't intervene. Sort of just let them fight over it if they want. Later on, of course, the Harkonnens are deposed, but not by the Emperor. I won't spoil that for you, but there was an interesting element as well to do with Paul Atreides, because he is two things in one. He is the heir apparent to this duchy, this House Atreides, and he becomes the Duke when Leto gets killed, his father. But then also, he's part of this this mythology, because the Fremen, the native people on Arrakis, have a mythology of what they call their Messiah. And they believe that Paul is the Messiah. And they, funnily enough, what's weird, they give him a name, they call it Lisdan al-Graib. Lisdain al-Graib. In this particular film, when his name, the Fremen name for the Messiah is Muad'Dib. And in the book and in the Lynch film, he's called Muad'Dib. Why have they changed it from Muad'Dib to this Lisdan al-Graib? Lisdan al-Graib. Why have they changed it? I wonder. And I can't help wondering if it's because Muad'Dib has another name in our circles, in the conspiratorial circles, because it's the nickname of John Anthony Hill, the man who made Mind the Gap. A very interesting documentary about the 7/7 bombings. He was actually arrested. He was actually prosecuted for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. He narrowly escaped jail, actually. I went to his trial. And his nickname is Muad'Dib. If you Google Muad'Dib, you'll come up with his website. Or you used to. I have to check that out and see if it's still the case. Because if it is still the case, that might be why. It might just be why they've decided to change the name to get rid of Muad'Dib. Because what other reason? There's no real reason why they should change it. Why would they change it? Everyone else has the same name. Why have they got rid of Muad'Dib and changed it for this other thing? I don't know. Anyway, I'm off to meet my friends. I'm actually I'm in touch with the local group. I mean, you may have seen some of them when I was doing that protest at Bond Square. The V word protest, the C word protest at Bond Square, and you may know them from there. I've actually stayed in touch with these people. We're having a meeting, a little get together at a pub. So that's where I'm going to go next. These are real world friends, guys. Yeah, not online, in the real world. So I've decided to go and join them, and then I'm going to head home, and then I'll continue this video later. Look, I'm here in the heart of Oxford. Just left the pub. My friends weren't there, or at least all the ones who I know what they look like weren't there. And I knew someone that was supposed to be there tonight, so they never turned up, which is a shame. But there you go. Well, it could be that 7 p.m. was a bit vaguer than I thought. But anyway, I got there at 7. No one was there. Waited till 7:30. I left. Maybe the arrangement. Maybe I misunderstood the arrangement. There's the old Bridge of Sighs there. Good postcard shot there from Ben. Maybe I misunderstood the arrangement. I don't know. Anyway, I'll catch up with them on Telegram as usual. Okay, I'm going to head off home now. I just wanted to... a few more thoughts about the film came to be. Firstly, the fact that I didn't enjoy it much, this film, could be because... it could be that it's because I'm familiar with the earlier film and with the book. It's possible if you hadn't read the book, or you hadn't and you hadn't seen the earlier film, which, as I believe, is far superior. It also covers the entire book. That's just something. You might enjoy it more. So this is just my own personal take on it, based on my experience with the story. It's one good thing about it, right? I've got to praise it on this. I've got to praise it an awful lot on this particular subject. We go down Queen's Lane now, spooky little area, which is famous in Oxford. One thing I've really got to praise this film on: it's not woke. It is not. I think maybe it's possibly. I'm hoping that wokeness may be something that it's a fever that Hollywood is now getting over. It's passed over like a wave of a fever, and Hollywood is now recovering from it. I think the shareholders have had a word and said, "Look, guys, where's our money?" So that's one good thing about it. It's not woke at all. The characters are exactly as they are described in the book. They are described. I mean, obviously, they may well be future humans. They may well be aliens. The same with Star Wars, where they're definitely aliens. But the physical description in the book is white people, essentially like white people, and that's how they are portrayed. Then it's not an all-white cast, and no reason why it should be. but the main characters, the characters who are meant to be white in this original story, are white in the film. So that I'm very pleased about. It's dare I hope that the filmmakers have honoured the traditionalist nature of the story. I don't know, because it is a very conservative, very traditionalist story. I mean, as I said, despite its setting in a distant galaxy, far, far away in the distant future, it's essentially a medieval story. It's rather like Game of Thrones. I mean, if you like Game of Thrones, I think you will recognise the society of Dune, even though one is a sci-fi space story and the other is a sort of medieval type fantasy. You will recognise the difference. It's interesting comparing. I want to say a few words also on Lynch's other works, particularly Twin Peaks. I've written a full review of Twin Peaks on Panmo Voice. What you'll find here with David Lynch, he tends to stick to his team. He has a team. I've noticed this. He works alongside with, for example, in Twin Peaks, both Twin Peaks and Dune have Kyle MacLachlan. Dune was the earlier work, and Kyle MacLachlan, I think, was a teenager when he was in that. Later, a few years later, Lynch did Twin Peaks, and he brought MacLachlan back to play Agent Cooper. He did that very well, clearly playing a character who's a good decade older than himself. But he does seem to be a very versatile actor in that respect. If you haven't seen Twin Peaks, I'm not going to describe it in detail now, except that it is an extraordinary production. It's a mini-series, of which I have done a written review on her Panmo Voice, and I'm not going to translate that to video. There's the team. The team includes MacLachlan. It also includes the woman who played the log lady in Twin Peaks. She was like a director of she was a member of the crew on Lynch's first movie, which was called Eraserhead, a very surreal, monochrome fantasy that he brought out in 1975. He made the film when he was broke. He was homeless. He slept in the bed in the studio, completely against studio regulations. I mean, he was really down on his luck, and he was hit rock bottom. And Eraserhead brought him back up. It's a very weird film. It might not appeal to you. I watched it, and I couldn't make head or tail of it, but it's a kind of like surreal horror fantasy type thing. The main character in that, he appears in Twin Peaks as Pete Martell, same actor. So it's like Lynch has his team he works with, I think. That does seem to be one of his hallmarks. The log lady actress, I said, was like a director of photography or something in Eraserhead. But you know, I'm just heading home now. I'm sure more thoughts will come to me. I've got a bit more time than I thought I would, because it looks like I'm not going to be meeting my friends, which is a shame. I mean, I'll contact them on Telegram, who knows, maybe they got lost. There was especially quite a few of them. None of them were there at 7. I waited till half 7 and I went home. I think that's fair enough, isn't it? You know, if you... Obviously not a date or something, but, you know, if you... They did say 7 p.m. I went there at 7, no one was there. So I went home. Not to worry, it may be... You know, some groups of people are a lot more vague. They say sort of about 7, like-ish. I'll know that next time, anyway. I'll know... If that is the case, I will know it next time. Anyway, I'm on the busy bit of the high street now, so I will stop talking and keep walking.
And so, as always, we have to come on to the critics. Oh, I hate critics. No, I don't. I mean, I don't really hate critics. I'm kidding you. But anyway, this is the part of my roving review where I take a little pause to see what the critics are saying. As always, I never read a review of a film before I have seen it. I don't like this idea of, well, I'm not going to go and see that film because it had rubbish reviews. Yeah. Well, that's the bloody critics doing your thinking for you then, isn't it? No. I mean, there's even this ridiculous phrase, you know, defying the critics. As if the critics have some kind of authority over our decisions and our tastes. They do not. So, sod the critics. They can think what they like. But anyway, I'm still interested to hear what they have to say now that I have seen the film myself. Well, this is the Garidian. news website of the year. Never mind, that's rubbish. Anyway, this is Mark Kermode's film of the week. He likes this, and it's got four out of 5. He's given it 4 stars, and by the way, when I speak in a voice like this, right, it's not just for your amusement as viewers. It's so that I can pause and I can introduce my own commentary on what this person's saying, and you will know when I'm speaking and when I'm reading from the text. So, I'll skip the first part, but he says here anyway, Dune review, Denis Villeneuve's sci-fi epic gets off to an electrifying start, man. So, I'll skip the first bit. Now, the first couple of paragraphs, he just talks about a proposal by this French-Chilean guy who wanted to do like a 16-part series on the novel, and it was never produced. But then he carries this is someone called Jodorowsky, so that was never produced. But then he carries on here. Here we go. It influenced Star Wars, Alien, and pretty much all subsequent scene sci-fi. Well, the book was very influential. Yes, I don't know if it influenced everything. I mean, it did influence Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars was partly created because George Lucas was inspired by reading the book of Dune. At the time he made Star Wars, there was no adaptation at all. But then he carries on here. A claim that cannot be made about David Lynch's finished but fatally flawed 1984 version. Well, as you know, I don't consider the Lynch one flawed. I mean, yeah, it's not perfect. As I explained before, I mean, the Fremen are far more accurately portrayed, at least physically, in this new film. However, I thought Lynch's Dune was fantastic. It was really good. I read the book after I saw that film. I really did. But anyway, he carries on. Now the French-Canadian director Denis Villeneuve, whose impressive genre CV includes Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, excuse me, has made a bold stab at proving that Herbert's book may not be unfilmable after all. Well, as you know, I don't think Herbert's book is unfilmable. I think the Lynch adaptation was pretty good. Obviously, it was concise compared to the book, because the book's quite long. However, it did cover the whole story quite well in terms of. I mean, the original plan for an adaptation, which was never produced, which I talked about earlier, had a 14-hour running time. It was going to be split into 16 episodes apparently for TV. It's a long, deep narrative, yeah, and Lynch does a good job of, I think, summarising it or putting it into a feature-length package, which doesn't really take much out of it, I don't think. But anyway, I do agree with this. I do agree with this guy when he said that Arrival is impressive. It certainly is. Blade Runner 2049 I've never seen, but Arrival was as I said, is probably the best alien invasion movie ever made. As I said, I was talking about that earlier. He carries on. Opening with the words Part 1 and closing with the direct declaration that this is just the beginning, Villeneuve's Dune sensibly tackles only one manageable section of the story, avoiding the baffling narrative compressions and ellipses that blighted the Lynch version, while reining in the extravagant excesses that thwarted Jodorowsky before he'd even started. Well, yeah, I did mention that this film only covers half of the original book, and that's why it's called Part 1. You only find out it's called Part 1 when you actually get there and watch it, because on the posters it just says Dune. However, I don't really think it's the kind of book that can be. It's not the kind of book that can be adapted into 2 films. It's not like Lord of the Rings, where Lord of the Rings was created in 3 volumes in 3 parts. Dune wasn't, and I think as I said earlier on, I think the ending of the film was rather truncated, and it's almost like it is literally something's cut in half. It's not rounded off. I mean, when I wrote my trilogy, the Roswell trilogy, I knew it's a single narrative. It had to be split into 3 parts. I do make each of the 3 parts, in a sense, are self-contained narratives of their own as part of that arc. I got the feeling that Villeneuve didn't actually do that with this film. This Dune is not a self-contained narrative in itself. It would have been better, I think, to make but even a slightly longer movie, even push it to 3 hours, make it a true epic, but do cover the entire story. I mean, the ellipses. I mean, there were of course ellipses and narrative compressions in the Lynch version. You have to do that if you're going to like an hour and a half film of this. However, I thought Lynch's version, after reading the book afterwards, I actually did think that Lynch's version was actually an excellent adaptation. I really think it was. Timothy Chalamet does his usual way-faced Edward Scissorhand impression as Paul Atreides. Yeah, this guy Timothy Chalamet, he's a sort of pale-faced, dark-haired guy, and he's very thin. He plays the teenager, and Paul Atreides is a teenager in the story. Anyway, he's beset by dreams of a Fremen girl, Chani, on the planet Arrakis. Yeah. In the Lynch film, Chani was played by Mary Sean Young, who, if you know anything about the conspiracy, you'll know that she's gone very, very conspiratorial, actually. She's not acting anymore, I don't think, but she's really on our side. She talks a lot about the New World Order and stuff like that. So it's worth looking at. Mary Sean Young, her name is. And she played Chani in the Dune of Lynch's Dune. As I said, the Fremen are much better done, actually, by Villeneuve. They are, I have to say that. Here, the House of Atreides and Harkonnen vie for control of the spice trade, a magical dust viewed by the desert-dwelling Fremen as the sacred hallucinogen that prolongs life, but harvested by off-worlders as the highly prized and thus highly priced key to navigating interstellar travel. Yeah, it's the spice is like this. It's like this substance on which their entire society depends on, because it's essential for interstellar space travel. Yeah, it allows them to fold space. Fold space is essentially hyperspace travel, warp speed, whatever you want to call it. It's where you can go through these Einstein-Rosen bridges, these wormholes to other planets. This is not really depicted very much in Villeneuve's movie. It's very well done in the Lynch one, even though it's like substandard special effects compared to today. They do a very, very good job of that. It could be the spice is an allegory for petroleum. I mean, I think this comes in the other review I just mentioned. However, I don't get the feeling that Herbert was writing an allegorical novel. I really don't. And the Lynch version is certainly not allegorical. But spice is similar to oil, and I mean the fact that Arrakis is modelled on the Middle East in terms of it being desert. In terms of the Fremen being very like the Bedouin, their language is similar to Arabic. A lot of the words are sound very much like Arabic. I can't speak Arabic, so I don't know how close the Fremen language words are to Arabic, but certainly they have that kind of feel to them. Like Shai Hulud is their name for the worms, the giant worms. Villeneuve and co-writers John Spates and Eric Roth conjure clear plot lines that accent the contemporary colonial parallels. All right, so yeah, this author has gone exactly where I thought he was going to go. Contemporary colonial parallels. That's certainly a theme, because he says here, this is a tale in which wealthy overlords battle over mineral resources in a vast sandy region that they find hostile and dangerous, yet irresistibly profitable. Of course, that is the theme. Basically, this is a planet which has an indigenous population, and it is essentially been colonized by the equivalent of maybe modern-day mega corporations to exploit the natural resources and sell them off to make money. And indeed, there are contemporary parallels of that. You could just look around. Look at the Dongria Khons in India, where there's this indigenous tribe that's been basically shoved off their sacred land because someone wants to build a bauxite mine there, and they've just been thrown off. This happens many, many times. There's the Aborigines at Maralinga in Australia that were basically pushed to one side so that the UK could do nuclear tests. As a result, those Aborigines then came down with diseases due to radiation exposure, birth defects and things like that. And indeed, the Fremen this Chani says her only knowledge of the Harkonnens is that they're the people, they're the invaders that have brutalized her people. However, when I'm reading the book, I don't think it was Frank Herbert's intention to create some kind of parody or satire on modern neo-imperialism. I don't think it was. There's an almost comedic element to the early scenes of Duke Leto Atreides arriving on Arrakis, heralded by the blaring of bagpipes. Yeah, that was funny. That I forgot to mention that he has like a bagpiper, like a true Highland bagpiper, as he's marching backwards and forwards as he steps off his spaceship. I don't know if that's meant to be comedic. It's obviously it's possible these musical instruments could survive into the future. Meanwhile, Charlotte Rampling shrouds her admirably straight face behind sinister black lace as Reverend Mother Mohiam, attempting to divine whether Paul is actually the prophesized one. Yeah, she was very good, actually. She was probably even more creepy and sinister than Sian Phillips playing the original Mohiam in the Lynch one. I mean, and the Bene Gesserits, you would expect the Bene Gesserits to dress. I mean, in the Lynch adaptation, they wear kind of nun's habit and they have bald heads and but they wear this kind of like exaggerated nun's habit. The Bene Gesserits in this film also have a much more exaggerated nun's dress. They wear the big tall hats with the full face veil. You know, it's like a burqa. Which is what nuns used to wear, and it's probably what you would expect the Bene Gesserits to wear. Rebecca Ferguson steals the show as Lady Jessica, torn between her desire to protect her son and the mysterious legacy of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. Yeah, she's very good, actually. Jessica's actress, Rebecca Ferguson. She does. I mean, she agrees that Paul should do this trial. Basically, she does a trial with Mother Mohiam, in which he has to face an ordeal or die. And his mother, of course, is terrified, but then understands that she has been training her son in the ways of the Bene Gesserit, and she's in big trouble for that, because you're not supposed to allow men to become Bene Gesserits. Men, sons are not supposed to be taught. It's only daughters she's supposed to teach. She doesn't have a daughter. She has one later on, but that's a story for the future. But so she's really in this caught between a devil and a deep blue sea, and she knows that if Paul dies, it's partly her fault. And she's very well put. She's very well presented, actually, Jessica, in this particular film. It's a good element, I think. So much of Herbert's novel has become part of the fabric of popular science fiction that at times Villeneuve's film may seem deceptively derivative. I see. They're kind of essentially saying that it may remind you of other science fiction you've seen, such as Star Wars and stuff like that. Or it's basically because of the influence of Herbert's novel on science fiction from the late 60s onwards. That could be true. But the idea of it's the Matrix-like question of Paul's foretold divinity, and many riffs can feel familiar. I suppose, yeah, it's, in a sense, Paul Atreides is very similar to Luke Skywalker or Neo, because Luke, of course, in Star Wars becomes the one who carries forward the Jedi traditions. He's the last Jedi, as the title of the awful, bloody sequel goes. But Neo, of course, is said to be the one. He's like the Messiah-like figure, and of course, Paul is Muad'Dib, or apparently I got that wrong actually early on. The actual name the Fremen give him is actually canon. I thought it wasn't. I thought they changed it from Muad'Dib to this other thing. However, I was reminded actually, and I should have remembered this from the book. It was like about 20 years ago I read it. But the Muad'Dib is simply the kangaroo mouse. They name him after this. They name him after this creature that lives in the desert. Yet the actual name for the Messiah is indeed this name they give him, which I can't remember. So that's actually, I thought that the filmmakers had moved away from canon in order to avoid people googling Muad'Dib. They may still do that. They may deliberately avoid Muad'Dib so that people don't Google it and find John Anthony Hill. Yeah. But he has several nicknames. He's also, Charlie originally calls him Usul, which means the base of a pillar, I remember. She says, she addresses him as Usul when she first meets him. And the visual sensibilities, yeah, the ornithopters are very well done. And they make the noise of helicopters, but they look like dragonflies. And the vast spaceships that glint in the mist. That was well done, That's very Arrival-like. It's the same visual... It's the same sort of visual intensity you get with Arrival. The sense of this huge solid thing just floating in the air. Like it's like nothing. You can almost see that it's heavy and solid even though it's floating. Very well done indeed. Yeah, that was very well done. Yeah, I should point out actually that Dune is... I was saying earlier on that I felt that I did sense that Herbert was not actually making an allegorical film. It didn't strike me as some kind of searing indictment on the modern corporatocracy told through an allegory. I didn't get that feeling at all. If anything, I would say that Dune is kind of like the Game of Thrones to the Lord of the Rings. See, the guy who made Game of Thrones said something very interesting. That is George R.R. Martin. Now, George R.R. Martin is sometimes called the American Tolkien because he wrote apparently similar books. However, the actual nature of Game of Thrones is very, very different indeed to Lord of the Rings. It's been described as in fact, someone actually said this, and Martin even, I think, admitted this. It's a kind of anti-Tolkien because Tolkien's philosophy was very idealistic. It was an idealistic view of the world. There was good versus evil. The heroes are good guys who do who aspire to a higher sacred moral. The kings, the Aragorn, and even the hobbits in their own way aspire to some kind of sacred moral. The king, obviously, his desire to rule his people justly and defend them. The hobbits, it's just the simple love of each other. Yet, Game of Thrones is very different. Game of Thrones is it's like a reaction to this idealism, in a sense that it's much more realistic. It's much more sort of different groups of people fighting for their own interests, regardless of and completely irrelevant of any greater purpose. You see what I mean? It's more. I suppose some people described it as Nietzschean, and this philosopher Nietzsche, who said talked about different kinds of morality. There was slave morality and divine and sort of lordly morality, and there is. I mean, the Harkonnens and the Atreides could be described as something more like the different houses of Game of Thrones. The different houses in Game of Thrones, it is about a power struggle. It is about a quest for will. The quest to enforce will on the world, rather than a quest to protect the world from some evil. Now, it's not completely ethically nihilistic. I must admit that. Indeed, I must say I've never watched Game of Thrones or read the book. Yep, believe it or not, I've never watched a single episode of Game of Thrones. There are a few of us, but people tell me it's right. People tell me it's not completely nihilistic, and indeed, Dune is not nihilistic. I mean, there is good and bad within Dune. The Harkonnens are bad. They do evil things. They're portrayed as more so actually in the Lynch one than this, but they're portrayed doing very evil things to other people, to their servants and slaves, and to the Fremen and to the people of Arrakis. They're very oppressive. They're brutal. They bomb. They drop bombs. They send their troops in to kill people. Things like that. The Atreides don't do that. The Atreides, as I said earlier, and it's only in the book you really get a sense of the difference between the Atreides and the Harkonnens. Duke Leto Atreides is a decent man in the sense he cares. He's a caring man who wants to rule Arrakis justly. So even though he's locked in this power struggle with the Harkonnens, he does understand that there is actually an ethical drive within the world. He does believe that there is a moral purpose to the universe that he lives in. And indeed, he's very Tolkienian. He's like Aragorn in that sense. He's like the other humans within the Lord of the Rings story. Vladimir Harkonnen is this horrible, brutal, great, big, enormous, fat guy. In the book, he can't even walk. In the book, he's described as basically having these anti-gravity generators around his body that allow him just even to walk. And he's he's a child abuser as well. He has a particular fondness for young boys. Now his nephew Phaedra Arthur is played by Sting in the Lynch version, and he's kind of suave and debonair and very masculine and that. In this new film, he's just like a smaller version of Vladimir. He's like this horrible, bald, squat sort of individual. But definitely there's good and bad. It is about the internal conflicts of power grabbing, but it's not completely devoid of a Tolkienian higher purpose, I would say. Anyway, where was I? Back on with the joke, as Ronnie Corbett used to say. Of course, Lynch's Dune contained its fair share of unforgettable sights too. From a steamy Sting posing with wings on his nethers, I don't remember that bit, to Kenneth Macmillan's pustular Baron Harkonnen, floating absurdly through the incoherent madness of the movie. Well, again, this guy has a very low opinion of Lynch's Dune. I think I have a very high opinion. It wasn't incoherent madness. It was a very well-constructed, well-paced adaptation, I thought. Villeneuve's altogether better-behaved version dials down the crazy. Oh. Dreams make good stories, says Jason Momoa's Duncan, Idaho. But everything important happens while you're awake. It's actually a Duncan, Idaho is this pilot who's he's an older man who is he's good friends with Paul. I think Paul sort of looks up to him and admires him and wants to go with him to Arrakis and things like that because he cares for him. He's a good character, as is Gurney. Gurney is the man who is essentially he's Paul's military drill instructor. He's played very well by Patrick Stewart in the Lynch film. In this one, he's played by I suppose he's just as good, but he's more like a classic military type of person rather than the one in the Lynch's film by Patrick Stewart. He was more sort of like intellectual, I think, even though he was still a tough warrior. I think the Gurney in Villeneuve's is slightly different in that respect. He's more conventionally military. But anyway, that was the Guridian. It's interesting, they didn't complain about the lack of wokeness. I was really that disappoints me a bit, because I was hoping to take the piss out of these people by them going on about it was all many white people everywhere and men, white males, white men, ugh, white males, ugh. But they didn't. Am I pleased or disappointed? I was certainly pleased at the lack of wokeness in the film, but I did hope The Guardian would complain about it, because I kind of think these critics have an obligation to get triggered over political incorrectness for the sake of my personal amusement. And they failed to do that this time. And so let us move on to the New York Times. Again, I'm going to do a sort of Richard Dolan voice for this one. A review of Dune, a hero in the making on shifting sands. This is by Manola Dargis. In a galaxy far, far away, a young man in a sea of sand faces a foreboding destiny. The threat of war hangs in the air. At the brink of a crisis, he navigates a feudalistic world with an evil emperor. Noble houses and subjugated peoples. Yeah, a tale right out of mythology and right at home in George Lucas's brain pan. Yeah, of course, but as I don't know if that's a criticism, but Lucas was inspired by Dune. Now, there's no way you can call Star Wars a plagiarization of Dune. It had similarities, but it was not a plagiarization. Lucas was inspired by a lot of things. I mean, it was only years later I worked this out when I read the books. But there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the scene in Empire Strikes Back, which that's generally considered the best of the trilogy. It's unusual for a middle section of a trilogy to be considered the best, but Empire Strikes Back was excellent. The section, the act where Luke is being trained in the ways of the Force by Yoda, is straight out of Carlos Castaneda. It's only if you read the books by Carlos Castaneda about Don Juan and the way he taught Carlos the ways of the Yaqui shamans. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. The experiences that Carlos goes through with the tuition of Don Juan is enormously like Yoda. But anyway, she goes on. But this is Dune, baby. This is Dune, baby. Frank Herbert's science fiction opus, which is making another run at a global box office domination, even as it heads towards controversy about what it is and its messianic protagonist slightly. Oh, I think this is sort of like a commentary and reply sort of thing, yeah. This is just, this is just someone commenting on right. I think this review is not by Manola Dargis. She's kind of like, she's doing like commentary on reviews as part of some kind of training course. I get the but anyway, I won't read her annotations, but I'll read whoever wrote the review. The movie is a Herculean endeavor from the director Denis Villeneuve, a starry, sumptuous take on the novel's first half. Starry, sumptuous? No, it's not really. It's, as I say, it's more kind of slow-paced, filmy noir. I don't know. I mean, you know, having thought about it, now I'm recording this 2 days after I saw it, and on reflection, I think it may have been better than I thought it was. Yeah. Published in 1965, Herbert's book is a beautiful behemoth crowded with rulers and rebels, witches and warriors. Herbert had a lot to say about religion, ecology, and the fate of humanity. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think he did set the book in the future of our universe rather than like in a galaxy far, far away or a parallel universe. Although there's no reference to Earth in the entire book, but he does mention, for example, the Fremen. Now they have a religion called Zen Sunni, which is based on Islam. It's a combination of Islam and Buddhism. 10,000 years in the future, they're kind of formed into one. And he drew from an astonishment of sources, from Greek mythology to indigenous cultures, inspired by government efforts to keep sand dunes at bay. He dressed up a desert planet where water was the new petroleum. He dreamed up a desert planet, yeah, where water was the new petroleum. It's funny that the water is, you often get the Fremen sometimes say things. The Fremen have a catchphrase when they really like somebody. They say he's worth his weight in water, as opposed to he's worth his weight in gold. And water could be, certainly on Arrakis, it certainly represents energy and power. And indeed, I won't spoil it for you, but this comes up later in the story, which presumably is in the second half of this Dune thing by Villeneuve, but it is actually portrayed very well by Lynch. But of course, spice is also the petroleum as well. As I said, I don't think it was meant to be allegorical, at least not consciously. But it seems to have, that's how many people interpret it. The result is a future shock epic that reads like a cautionary tale of our environmentally ravaged world. I don't think so, you know. I really don't think it's meant to be that way. Arrakis is a world of its own. Yes, it's based on the Middle East, and you could say, well, it's based on Saudi Arabia with all the oil. But I really I really think she misunderstands Herbert's point here. When she's read the book, she says yes, she has her own copy of the book, and it's quite an amazing book. Funnily, if it's a series, there's a series of them, and I've only ever read the first one. Villeneuve likes to work on a large scale, but has a miniaturist's attention to fine-grained detail, which fits for a story as equally sweeping and intricate as Dune. Yes, visually it's a great movie, despite it's a bit dark. The colours and the lighting is too low, I think, for the actual story it represents. But it's still visually very intense and very, very intricate. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, in a sense, it is superior in that sense, possibly to the Lynch movie. But then the thing is, the Lynch movie was made in 1984, and there weren't things like CGI back then. There's simply the technology for special effects wasn't as good. I think possibly today Lynch may have surpassed. If he'd made it today, he may have surpassed Villeneuve's, because Lynch, I think, he's a better kind of storyteller than Villeneuve. Villeneuve is good for creating atmosphere, concepts, and subtext. But Lynch, when it comes to just setting the narrative out, Lynch is superior, I think. Like the novel, the movie is set thousands of years in the future, and centers on Paul Atreides, Timothy Chalamet, a scion of a noble family, with his father, Duke Leto, Oscar Isaac, and his mother, Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson. Paul is to depart from his new home on a desert planet called Arrakis. The Duke, on orders from the Emperor, is to take charge of the planet, which is home to the monstrous sandworms, enigmatic Bedouin-like inhabitants, and a highly addictive, highly valuable resource called spice. That's a good summary of the story, yeah. Much ensues. There are complicated intrigues, along with sword fights, heroic deaths, and many inserts of a mystery woman throwing come-hither glances at the camera. Yeah, in a sense, the Chani in here is like she's not quite the same, and very, very different. I mean, Mary Sean Young's Chani was more sort of solid and less etheric. The actress who plays Chani is actually called Zendaya, just a single name in this particular adaptation. She looks more exotic. She's racially, I think she's Middle Eastern, I would say, and she has long hair, and she has the glowing blue eyes are amazing, and that's caused by the spice. The spice causes everyone to have like luminous blue eyes. It's very good. But both women are very alluring. I mean, I think they capture the femininity and the sexuality of the two, both Lynch and Villeneuve. And Paul, of course, you know that Paul is destined to be this woman's lover. Yeah. Where are we now? She's one piece of the multifaceted puzzle of Paul's destiny, as is a mystical sisterhood. That's the Bene Gesserit, yeah. It just goes on. I mean, the idea of the supernatural and psychic powers and things like that is actually present quite significantly within this story. The prophetic dreams of Paul, who is destined to become a messiah-like figure, which is interesting. He becomes the Duke of Atreides, but also, in a sense, he's playing this dual role as the savior, messiah of the Fremen. It's an interesting position he really occupies. You don't really understand it until you see the continuation of the story. The movie leans on a lot of exposition, partly to help guide viewers through the story's denser thickets, but Villeneuve also uses his visuals to advance and clarify the narrative. The designs and textures of the movie's various worlds and their inhabitants are arresting, filigreed, and meaningful, with characters and their environments in sync. At times, though, Villeneuve lingers too long over his creations, as if he wanted you to check out his cool new line of dragonfly-style choppers and bleeding corpses. This isn't a funny movie, but there are mordantly humorous flushes, notably with the Baron, whose bald head and oily bath indicates that Villeneuve is a fan of Apocalypse Now. Yeah, he's been compared to... he does look a bit like Kurtz, the character played by Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now. Funny enough, someone said I looked like him too when I did my I did my Brexit. I did my Brexit thing. Yeah. It's funny because this didn't actually happen in the book, if I remember rightly, or in the Lynch film. Baron Vladimir Harkonnen is lying in a bath of black goo. And I do wonder if where they get the idea from, I really do. But he does look he does look Marlon Brando-esque because his head rises out of the black goo. It's weird, yeah. Anyway, well, that's enough of that. I think I'm afraid this review goes on too long for me to read all of it. But that was the New York Times' take on it. And, on reflection, I think possibly I remember it now being better than it was when I first came out of the cinema.
And so that was my review of Dune. I'm going to do another of these roving reviews. I've got another one planned. I've got lots of other videos planned. So don't forget to keep watching the channel because there's more coming as soon as possible. Thank you, all of you, for watching Herpanwo TV. Hospital Reporters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.